Thank you. Our speaker today is the embodiment of our core values. When I was 20 and a student at Washington University, it was the first time I met Denise Lieberman. And I remember walking away from that experience thinking, I want to be like her when I grow up. Denise Lieberman is a nationally recognized voting rights and civil rights lawyer. She's been on the front lines of constitutional debates, fighting government overreach in Missouri and around the country for the past 25 years. She serves as director and general counsel of the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, which is anchoring the legislative fight to protect Missouri's citizen initiative process. She's testified before Congress, and she's previously served as the director of the Voter Protection Program at Advancement Project National Office in Washington, D.C., and before that, she served as the legal director of the ACLU of Eastern Missouri. She is currently an attorney of record on behalf of the Americans United for Separation of Church and State and the National Women's Law Center in the case Blackmon versus Missouri, a case challenging Missouri's abortion ban as a violation of the separation of church and state. In addition to all of that, she's also an adjunct professor of law and political science at Washington University, where she is currently teaching gender, sexuality, and the law, as well as a studio lab course on the politics of reproduction. We are honored and thrilled that she's taking time out of her very busy schedule to be here with us today. Please welcome her with a warm Ethical Society greeting.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Thank you so much to all of you for having me back at the Ethical Society today. It's such a joy to be here, and it's such a joy to share in the core values that, that we all share, of respect and the acknowledgement of the basic human dignity that all of us have. And that's really why I do the work that I do. You might be wondering, what is a voting rights lawyer doing litigating an abortion challenge? And I think that at its core, both of these issues are about the ability to exercise our own autonomy over our lives. And that is a basic core value that acknowledges that everybody has a right to dignity, to express themselves. In the voting realm, voting is how we speak publicly. It's how we have the freedom to not just hold our leaders accountable, but make decisions about the futures of our own lives, control our own destinies. And at its core, reproductive freedom also is about acknowledging our basic human dignity and our right to control our own destinies. And so for me, these two issues are deeply interconnected. And so when I got the phone call back shortly after the Dobbs decision came down from my friends at Americans United for Separation of Church and State, who I had worked with decades before when I was at the ACLU, asking if I would be part of a conversation about a novel way to challenge Missouri's abortion ban, it was hard for me to say no. I guess that's how I get so busy, because it's hard for me to say no to an opportunity and a challenge like that. And so I'm going to share a little bit about that case today and what lies ahead for us. But what I can tell you is that you already know the answer. What lies ahead for us is that we live our core values, that we work to uplift the basic human dignity of all people, and that we continue to fight for the ability of each and every one of us to have control over our own destinies. It's really as simple as that. All right. All right, good. Well, I think many of us probably remember where we were when the Dobbs decision came down in June of 2022, overturning Roe v. Wade, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and concluding that after 50 years of acknowledging a fundamental constitutional right of privacy to control our bodies, that was no longer a fundamental constitutional right. It was certainly, while it was not an unexpected decision, it was certainly a jarring one for many of us. You don't have to be a person of reproductive years. You don't have to be a parent. You don't have to be someone with a uterus to understand the implications of a ruling that says you don't have a right to make decisions about your own body. And so like you, I was pretty floored when that decision came down, and anxious and upset, and knew that a place like Missouri was going to be a hostile place for all of us after that. And indeed it was. We knew immediately after the Dobbs decision came down, an estimated 24 million women of reproductive age were living in areas that were automatically lost service. And Missouri, being the first out of the gate, we were the very, very first state in Missouri to pass a trigger ban, or enact a trigger ban, banning all abortions, basically all abortions in the state of Missouri, with the exception of medical emergencies, which was undefined. So we don't know what that means. And Missouri was already a very hostile place for reproductive rights. And what we do know about the fall of Roe is that over the last 50 years, Roe really wasn't the promise of autonomy and dignity for many, many people. Especially here in Missouri, we had the longest period in the country. We had trap laws that have resulted in the closures of all but one clinic in the whole state. It was already a place that low-wage workers, rural, birthing people, disproportionately people of color, young people, really didn't have access anyway. Missouri was already a place that had one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the country. And for Black and brown birthing people, some of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world, already before the Dobbs decision came down. And then we dignified ourselves further by becoming the very, very first state to ban abortions. And you can see here there's a tweet by our governor proudly pronouncing Missouri as the very first state to ban abortion after the Dobbs decision came down. And they were able to do that because lawmakers had actually passed this abortion ban several years prior. Think about that. In 2019, lawmakers passed a ban to abortion while Roe v. Wade was the law of the land, knowing it was unconstitutional. Lawmakers that took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution passed a law that allowed the banning of abortions, knowing that it was unconstitutional, and placing in it a clause that says if Roe v. Wade is ever overturned, this law can go into effect immediately. Meaning that it didn't have to go through the legislative process after Dobbs came down. We didn't have to wait for a lawmaker to file a bill. There was no opportunity after Dobbs came down to attend a public hearing or to testify or to share with lawmakers their views on how this would affect them. No waiting through the legislative process, no waiting for the governor to sign. It went into effect immediately without the ability to weigh in further. And Missouri wasn't just the first state to do that. There were about 13 states that had such trigger laws. And so how do we get here to this lawsuit? Well, of course, after the fall of Dobbs, and the loss of a federal constitutional right of privacy, it meant that no longer could you argue in court that a ban on reproductive health care, a ban on abortion, violated your fundamental right of privacy, because it no longer did. And so we began thinking about novel ideas, other ways to think about this issue. And we began to realize that what really was happening in this law was the lawmakers dictating one narrow view, a religious view, upon the rest of the state in enacting this law. And I'm going to show you why. Now, abortion bans had never been challenged before as an enactment of government religion. In part because, well, the courts had concluded there was a fundamental right of privacy to control our bodies. But now this idea was sprouting. And I was sort of surprised when I did receive that call back in October of 2022 from Americans United for Separation of Church and State, saying, we think that Missouri would be the right place to try out this idea. Now, as someone that's been a civil rights lawyer for more than 2 decades, it is not often that Missouri is cited as the leader in moving civil rights forward. So you can understand my skepticism that Missouri was the right place to try this idea. But there were several reasons for it. Here's the suit itself, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. So after the Dobbs decision came down, we realized that it fell back to the states, right? And we know that some states decided to respect the dignity of birthing people in their states, like Illinois, and other states decided to take matters into their own hands and pass measures themselves, like Kansas and now Ohio. We didn't have that here in Missouri, but what we did have is a powerful, powerful group of faith leaders who came together to say, this is not how we view religion. And the reason Missouri was selected as the leading state, I'll share this with you in a second. I'm going to come back to this. Is because of two things. First, fun fact, Missouri's Constitution actually provides a higher wall, more protection for the separation of church and state than the federal Constitution does. I know. Who would have thunk it? By the way, Missouri's Constitution also provides higher protection for the right to vote than the federal Constitution does. Yes, I know. And the other reason is that lawmakers in Missouri were not shy about announcing why they were passing this ban on abortion. They said the quiet part out loud. They, in fact, were quite proud in arguing that it was their particular religious beliefs about when life begins that were the basis for this law. And what we knew when we began talking with folks is that that's not everybody's view, right? It's a faith-based view. And so Missouri then became the first state to bring this challenge. But we then thought, well, who are the best people to tell this story? To tell this story about how there is not one religious viewpoint, that religious views are along a spectrum, and that it's not okay for the government to impose one narrow religious view upon everybody else. Because in truth, anybody could have brought this lawsuit. We're arguing that the plaintiffs in this case can challenge this law as taxpayers because their tax dollars are going to fund an unconstitutional law. So any one of us could have been the plaintiffs in this case, but we went to faith leaders because we knew that their message would be such a powerful antidote to what we were hearing out of Jefferson City. And so I want to share a little bit. Whoops. We were also really strategic in deciding when and where to file this lawsuit. So you can see that we appear to be in a church, and we were. We were down at was it Christ Church Cathedral downtown, and we filed this right before what would have been the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, to tie it together. But it was truly the leadership of 14 faith leaders from a variety of faith traditions who came together to speak out and say no. And who has more authority to talk about this than these faith leaders? And you might think, well, here we are at the Ethical Society, we're humanists, but that's exactly the point, is that so many faith traditions uphold the core values that you fight for here. So many faith traditions are rooted in acknowledging and uplifting the basic human dignity of all people. the ability to be autonomous in our lives and ourselves, to be in control of our own destinies. Because when we're not in control of our own destinies, we are not free. So I'm so very proud, and I shouldn't even be standing up here today because it's these leaders that are speaking out against this law. And you can see some of them here on these slides. They come from, they're 14 faith leaders from varying faith traditions, from various places around the state of Missouri. And I'm so proud that one of the plaintiffs in this case is here in this room, Rev Barbara Fifer. Who is also a state legislator. Oh. She knows a thing or two about both of these things. And I'm very proud as well that my own rabbi, Rabbi Susan Talvey, is also a member of the clergy plaintiffs. And these folks are speaking out in authoritative ways about the power of each of us to control our lives and our destinies. And so I want to share with you a little bit about what we are challenging. Because we're challenging not just the ban on abortion, but the variety that was contained in House Bill 126 from 2019, which is the total ban, with the exception of medical emergencies. But also Missouri's cascading gestational bans, reason bans, and some of the trap laws. You can see here that this is a pretty hefty criminal penalty. A violation of House Bill 126 is a Class B felony punishable by 5 to 15 years in prison. So how were we able to do this? Well, like I said, lawmakers were not shy about announcing that this law was rooted in one particular faith tradition. And not only did they share it out loud, but they also put it into the text of the statute. It's pretty hard to argue against that. In fact, Missouri's Chapter 1 of Missouri statutes begin with a statement that the life of each human being begins at conception. But we've got the Missouri Constitution to fight back. 3 different sections of Missouri's Constitution guarantee that the wall separating church and state is a tall one, banning any type of government coercion, government preference, or government mandate enforcing religious beliefs. Article 1, Section 5, Article 1, Section 6, prohibiting any type of coercion, compelling, or support of religion, and 7, banning any state funds from being used to advance a religious purpose. And these provisions are necessary to guarantee our freedom because we know that the separation of church and state is absolutely essential to religious pluralism. It is essential to religious freedom that the government not take one religious viewpoint and prefer it over others. I feel like I'm sort of, no pun intended, preaching to the choir here on that point. So I know you all get this. Let me show you what's in this law, and then share with you a little bit about what you can do to help support this and other efforts to gain our fundamental freedoms back. So House Bill 126, this is the abortion ban passed in 2019. This is literally the first words of the statute, that it is the intention of the General Assembly of the State of Missouri to regulate abortion in recognition that Almighty God is the author of life. That's the statute number. You can look it up, and when you pull that page out of the book, that is what you're going to see.
legislative findings currently in law.
Someone had mentioned yesterday that this is unconstitutional separation of church and state. The fact of the matter is that I know of no greater way of affirming the natural rights of man than to declare that they are a gift from our Creator.
God doesn't give us a choice in this area. He is the creator of life. And I, being made in his image and likeness, don't get to choose to take that away no matter how that child came to be.
And what makes you valuable is that you equally share the image of our Creator. You are his work of art.
To me, life begins at conception, and my God doesn't get that option.
You have inherent dignity protected by the Constitution and inherent dignity provided by God.
I rise to offer an amendment ending in .18H. It has been distributed. I move for its adoption.
The only question I have is a rhetorical one, and that is, how many of our constituents agree with the statement that God is the author of human life? That statement itself is in violation of the separation of church and state. It's an anti-constitutional statement in and of itself, and I ask the body to oppose the amendment.
And many of these individuals, whoopsie, don't want to do that again, who were state representatives at the time of this law are now senators. They have almost universally been promoted. Nick Shore, Ben Baker, Senator Ryder. So, so they truly did say the quiet part out loud, right? Now, this might seem then like a fairly open and shut case, but it's not. It's not, because we have to convince the court that this is not okay. When we went to court, the state has filed motions to dismiss this case. We went to court and we argued. And the Attorney General said, and the Solicitor General said, you're discriminating against elected officials of faith. Which of course is not the case. All of us have a right to our individual faith beliefs. That's the whole point of the separation of church and state. Each and every one of us, including every one of those lawmakers whose voices you just heard, have that right. What they don't have the right to do is impose that religious belief on the rest of us. And because we are doing this work, and because we are doing this work in community with faith leaders who are so inspiring in the work they do to protect the least of these, to advance the notions of basic human dignity of us all. Because we're working in community with grassroots partners, we are helping change the narrative. Because even if we don't win this case, I hope we do, because it will restore my faith in the power of our Constitution. But even if we don't, we're helping change the narrative. Because right now, we are battling a narrative that says people who are anti-choice and anti-abortion are religious and therefore have the moral authority. And accordingly, people who are pro-choice, are pro-abortion, are pro-access to reproductive health care are not religious and, by association, not moral authorities. That's a really important conversation for us to have and an important narrative for us to break. We know that you all know this here as humanists, that there is not one way to believe, and that your core values are rooted in respect respecting others and respecting free will and respecting the rights of us all to live our own personal truths. That's a moral cause. And I believe that we're getting there. I want to sort of conclude by showing you a little bit about that hearing that we recently had. Because in doing what we're doing in the community, our message is getting out there. This was the story that appeared on the front page of the Post-Dispatch after that court hearing. And I want to end with this news coverage right here. Whoopsie. Stop. Sorry. And this was the coverage.
Faith leaders were back in court today arguing against Missouri's abortion ban. It was the latest chapter in their months-long battle to get the ban overturned. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mike Bush.
And I'm Ann Allred. Our Justina Cornell has been following this case. She was in the courtroom today and joins us live from downtown St. Louis. Justina.
Yeah, I'm told today's hearing is a critical step because based on today's arguments, the judge could continue the case or end it.
Tracy Blackmon et al. Versus State of Missouri et al.
Battling over abortion bans. An 11-month fight continues in court Thursday.
They sued us back in January, and here we were to defend the abortion laws.
I'm on your side was there when 14 clergy members announced a lawsuit against the state of Missouri over restrictions on abortion services.
Today's hearing, however, the court will just be ruling on a motion by the state. And so we'll find out next year whether this case will be proceeding.
The clergy members and their attorneys argue that the ban violates the state's commitment to the separation of church and state.
We hope that the court will recognize that this was clearly the intent and purpose of the legislature to impose their religious beliefs on everyone in Missouri by passing this abortion ban.
But the state's attorneys are against that argument.
Because some religious people are pro-life, then the pro-life laws can't stand. But it's also the case that there are, in the 10 Commandments, there are laws or commandments against theft, there are commandments against other things like that. It's always going to be the case that there are some religious people who agree with whatever law you have on the books. So if that's a standard, then you can't have a single law ever. That's a recipe for anarchy.
Divided by their differences, both sides agree they are feeling confident.
It really is telling that they're trying to bring this in state court under the state constitution, because it's under the federal constitution, it's a completely frivolous argument. They're trying to repackage this under the state constitution. We don't think it's going to work.
We are optimistic that the court will agree that it is inappropriate to dismiss the case at this early stage in the proceedings.
Now, the judge said that he won't have an answer until after the holidays, most likely in January. No matter what the judge decides, we expect either side to appeal. Reporting in downtown St. Louis, Justina Cornell, 5 on your side.
So that's where we are. And and we have not gotten a ruling yet. So we are awaiting that ruling. But in the meantime, we are changing the narrative, and you can help do that. As you all know, there is a statewide initiative petition that would restore constitutional protection for bodily autonomy into our state constitution. And talking about values-based messaging is an important part of that. I know I saw Kayla Vaughn earlier, and I know that she has some petitions up there if you wish to sign it that would allow the measure to get onto the ballot. But we're also facing, from the very same actors who passed this bill, attempts to make our initiative petition process harder. So Senator Mary Elizabeth Coleman, who you saw on the video, leading the charge to pass House Bill 126, is also the sponsor of a bill pending right now, SJR 74, that is already passed out of the Senate and has a hearing in the House Elections Committee this Tuesday at noon that would end majority rule in the citizen initiative process, making it much, much harder for measures to pass. So this is an incredibly timely time for me to be here, and I encourage you all to let your lawmakers know that the initiative petition process, like access to abortion, is something that belongs to us all. We all have a right to have a say in what our government does, especially when they're not being responsive to us in the state house. This, again, is about advancing our own fundamental rights to exercise autonomy over our futures. You can submit testimony on SJR 74 online. You don't even have to drive to Jeff City. I'll be driving to Jeff City. But you don't have to do that. You can submit that testimony online to the House Elections Committee, as long as you do so by before midnight on Tuesday night. So you can find that information if you go to house.mo.gov. I want to thank you for allowing me into your beautiful space today, and for standing up for the rights of all of us to have autonomy over our lives, and fighting for the belief that all of us have that right, that each and every one of us has that right to basic human dignity, to believe what we want to believe, and to be the controllers of our own destinies. So I'm grateful to be here with you today, and hope to continue to fight for individual freedoms in the coming days ahead. Thank you.
You see why I wanted to be Denise when I grow up, right? Thank you so much. We appreciate you walking us through the nuances of this case and for clearly demonstrating what it means to strive to live your values. In case you all didn't know, the Ethical Society emphatically stands with the plaintiffs of this case. Our freedoms depend on it. And you are welcome to come back in 2 weeks to hear the second part of our Reproductive Justice Platform series. Kennedy Moore of Abortion Action Missouri will share about that initiative petition that Denise was just sharing about, and that Kayla has for you to sign out back. And if you're feeling fired up, know that there are folks all around who are fired up with you. Let's make a change together. Okay, I recognize that we may be running a little long. If you are worried about a young person downstairs, you're welcome to sneak out, but I hope that you will stay. There's childcare available. Okay. All right, the Welcome team will now take up a collection to support the society. Like all nonprofits, we rely on the generosity of members and friends to ensure that we can keep providing our many free programs. And if you don't have cash with you today, you can donate at ethicalstl.org/donate or use the QR code that is on the screen. And if you're interested in joining the Ethical Society and becoming a pledging member, or you're a new visitor and you would like to know more about the society, our interim director, Amy Miller, and membership coordinator, Courtney Scott Camarada, will be available afterwards downstairs to answer your questions. Plus, they brought donuts today, so you can join them right after platform for the discussion in the Hanky Room, which is the room closest to the back door. Okay, I have one additional announcement for you. A week from today, the Board of Trustees is hosting the 945 Forum to discuss the Society's relationship with our umbrella organization, the American Ethical Union. And this meeting is twofold. One is to answer questions you may have about the AEU, their current revamping effort, and the apportionment that we currently pay to them. Two, the board also wants to know how you view the Society's relationship with the AEU and get your thoughts about how and if we move forward in that relationship. So if you haven't been able to attend any of the previous board-hosted opportunities to talk about the AEU, please plan to return next week for forum at 9:45. Okay. We'd love to keep you informed about future events at the Ethical Society of St. Louis. You can use the QR code to sign up for the weekly newsletter or check the Ethical Society Facebook group or email the relevant staff person or member. This is a vibrant place of people committed to doing good, and I hope that you can get involved and connected into the community in ways that feel good for you. Okay, that closes out our announcements for today. We're going to welcome the Ethical Band back up to the stage for the aptly titled musical piece, Ethical Society. I wonder what that's about. I also understand that there may be opportunities for audience participation. I know. That means you, friends. Let's welcome the band back up to the stage.
Yeah, I appreciate those opening words from Cassie. Certainly, I think that we've heard a lot of opening words, a lot of similar stories like that, and there's some common themes that I think you'll pull out. So that's sort of the inspiration behind the songs.